Welcome to one of the most disturbing cases recorded in American logging history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing how far these documented accounts reach and at what times of day or night. The events we're about to explore took place in the remote forests of northern Wisconsin, where the Black River cuts through dense pine wilderness. According to records from the Chippewa County Historical Society, 19 men set out to cross the swollen river on March 17, 1891. 6 hours later, only 6 returned. What happened during those hours would forever haunt the logging industry of the region and leave a stain on the small town of Weyerhaeuser that some say persists to this day. The winter of 1890-91 was particularly harsh across the upper Midwest. Temperatures plunged to unprecedented lows, with the Wisconsin State Journal recording minus 40 degrees for weeks at a stretch. The snowfall was relentless, piling up to nearly 6 feet in some areas by late January. For the logging companies operating in the region, these conditions presented both opportunity and danger. The frozen ground made it easier to transport massive logs, but the isolation and bitter cold pushed men to their limits. Holmberg Timber Company established Camp 27 approximately 17 miles northwest of Weyerhaeuser in late 1889. The camp consisted of 3 main structures: a long bunkhouse, a mess hall, and a small office for the foreman. According to company records preserved in the Wisconsin Historical Society archives, Camp 27 housed 37 men during the winter of 1891. Most were immigrants: Swedes, Norwegians, Germans, and a few Irish. They came seeking the relatively high wages the dangerous work provided, money they could send back to families or use to purchase land of their own. The foreman, Augustus Holmberg, was the younger brother of the company owner. County records describe him as a serious man of stern constitution, standing over 6 feet tall with a thick beard that partially concealed a scar running from his left eye to his jawline. Former employees interviewed for a 1937 WPA oral history project recalled that Augustus rarely smiled and demanded absolute obedience from his men. One former logger, Emil Gustafsson, stated, "The men feared Holmberg more than they feared the saws or the winter." What makes the Camp 27 incident particularly disturbing is how ordinary everything seemed in the days leading up to the tragedy. The camp ledger, now housed in the Marathon County Historical Museum, shows routine entries: inventory of supplies, production quotas, minor injuries treated. There is no indication of unusual tension among the men, no record of disputes or disciplinary problems. The last entry, dated March 16, 1891, simply notes, "Clear weather, 26 degrees, river rising with spring thaw," cutting to conclude at North Ridge tomorrow. The 19 men who departed camp at dawn on March 17th were selected by Augustus himself, according to the sole surviving letter from logger Franz Mueller to his wife in Milwaukee. The letter, dated March 25, 1891, states, "Holmberg came through the bunkhouse before first light, pointing to men as they lay in their bunks. You, not you. You!" No explanation given for who was chosen or why. Muller's letter, now preserved in the Wisconsin Historical Society archives, continues, "I was not selected," which at first seemed like good fortune. Now I wonder if I wouldn't have preferred to know what happened on the other side. The destination of the 19-man crew was reportedly an untouched stand of old-growth white pine, approximately 4 miles on the opposite side of the Black River. Company records indicate this timber had been purchased the previous autumn, but left unharvested due to difficulties accessing the remote location. With spring approaching and the logging season coming to an end, there was urgency to extract this valuable timber before the spring thaw made the operation impossible. The most comprehensive contemporary account of what transpired comes from the Chippewa Herald newspaper, dated March 22, 1891. The article, titled "Tragedy Befalls Logging Camp," reported, 6 men emerged from the forest Wednesday evening in a state of extreme distress, claiming 13 of their companions perished while crossing the Black River earlier that day. The survivors, all in poor condition and speaking incoherently, were brought to Dr. Anderson's office in Weyerhaeuser. Authorities have dispatched a search party to locate the missing men, though rising waters make the effort perilous. Those 6 survivors, Olaf Lindstrom, Jeremiah Collins, Carl Schaefer, Peter Anderson, Mikhail Baranov, and Augustus Holmberg himself, would provide conflicting accounts of what happened that day. Their contradictory testimonies, preserved in the sheriff's investigation report, would only deepen the mystery surrounding the fate of their 13 companions. Olaf Lindstrom, a 34-year-old Swedish immigrant, claimed the men attempted to cross the river on a makeshift raft of lashed logs, despite the dangerous spring conditions. According to his statement, recorded by Sheriff James Patterson, the raft broke apart midway across. Men were thrown into the freezing water. The current was too strong. I heard screaming, then nothing. When asked how he survived, Lindstrom reportedly stared at the wall and whispered, "I swam." "I just swam." The medical examiner's notes, however, cast immediate doubt on this account. Dr. Thomas Anderson wrote, "Subject shows no signs of immersion. Clothing is dirty but dry. No evidence of hypothermia or exposure to cold water. Physical condition inconsistent with claimed river crossing." When confronted with these discrepancies, Lindstrom reportedly became agitated, insisting, "I swam through it, not in it." Through it. Jeremiah Collins, an Irish logger who had worked for Holmberg Timber for 3 years, offered an entirely different account. According to the sheriff's report, Collins claimed, "We never reached the river. There was something in the woods, something that called to us with familiar voices. Jensen went first, then Mueller. They walked into the mist and didn't return." Sheriff Patterson noted that Collins became increasingly distressed during his interview, eventually curling into a fetal position and covering his ears as if hearing something unbearable. Collins was subsequently transferred to the Northern Wisconsin Hospital for the Insane in Winnebago, where attending physician Dr. William Gorman documented his rapid deterioration. Hospital records indicate Collins refused to sleep, claiming, "They come for you in the dark. Their fingers tap on the windows. They have too many fingers." He died 4 months later of what hospital records describe as acute melancholia with catatonic features, though Dr. Gorman's private correspondence, uncovered in 1967, suggests Collins may have deliberately starved himself to death. Carl Schaefer's testimony introduced even more disturbing elements to the investigation. A German immigrant who had joined Camp 27 only 2 months earlier, Schaefer was found with his hands and forearms severely lacerated, injuries the man refused to explain. Sheriff Patterson recorded that during his interview, Schaefer spoke in a flat, emotionless tone, stating, "Holmberg knew. He always knew. That's why he chose who would go. He needed 13 of us for them. A trade." When pressed for clarification, Schaefer reportedly began scratching at the wooden table with his fingernails until they bled, repeating, "The trees were not trees." Dr. Anderson's medical report notes that Schaefer's self-inflicted wounds formed a distinctive pattern. Subject has carved what appear to be crude representations of trees into his own flesh, extending from wrist to elbow on both arms. When questioned about these injuries, Subject states, "I needed to know what was inside." The testimony of Peter Anderson initially seemed to corroborate Lindstrom's account of a river crossing gone wrong. However, Sheriff Patterson noted several inconsistencies in his statement. Anderson claimed to have been at the rear of the raft when it broke apart, yet could provide no details about how the structure was constructed or how many men were aboard. When asked to identify which of his companions had drowned, he named several men who had not been part of the expedition at all. Most curious was Anderson's insistence that the incident had occurred at sunset, despite company records and other testimonies placing the river crossing attempt in the early morning hours. When this discrepancy was pointed out, Anderson reportedly became confused, stating, It was morning when we left, but the sky turned red as we approached the river. Not like sunrise, like sunset, like the day was ending instead of beginning. Mikhail Baranov, a Russian immigrant who had previously worked in the timber industry in his homeland, provided the most coherent account initially. He described how the crew had constructed a raft using techniques common among river loggers, lashing together 15 pine logs with rope and creating a crude steering mechanism. According to his testimony, the raft began to break apart approximately halfway across the swollen river, throwing men into the freezing current. Baranov claimed to have clung to a fragment of the raft, eventually making it to the far shore. He stated that he saw Holmberg, Lindstrom, and Schaefer also reach land, but no one else. When asked about Collins and Anderson, he appeared momentarily confused, then stated they must have made it across at a different point. Sheriff Patterson noted that Baranov maintained steady eye contact throughout his interview and spoke with apparent candor, making his account seem the most reliable. However, Dr. Anderson's medical examination undermined Baranov's credibility as well. The doctor wrote, "Subject, like others, shows no evidence of immersion in cold water or exposure to elements consistent with his story. Furthermore, subject has unusual markings on palms of both hands, perfectly circular burns approximately 1 inch in diameter. When questioned, subject claimed ignorance of these wounds, despite their apparently recent origin." Most significantly, Augustus Holmberg, the expedition leader and company foreman, refused to provide any statement at all. According to Sheriff Patterson's notes, subject sits in silence, staring at the wall, responds to no questions, appears physically unharmed but completely withdrawn, eyes track movement, but he gives no indication he hears or understands speech directed at him. Dr. Anderson's examination noted, subject in state of catatonic withdrawal, physically healthy but mentally absent. Pupils react normally to light, reflexes intact. No evidence of head trauma or other physical injury that might explain his condition. Curious observation. Subject's pockets contained approximately 24 white pine needles, meticulously arranged in patterns and bound with thread. The search party that set out on March 23rd found no trace of the missing 13 men. Sheriff Patterson's report states, "We followed the trail to the river's edge. The water is high but not impassable. We found no evidence of a raft, broken or otherwise. No personal effects, no tools, no signs of struggle. It is as if 13 men simply vanished from the earth." The report continues, "We crossed the river to search the opposite bank. Located area of white pine, mentioned in company records approximately 4 miles inland. Trees undisturbed, no evidence of logging activity, no footprints or signs of human presence, despite relatively dry ground that should have preserved tracks." One detail in the sheriff's report stands out as particularly unusual. Deputy Michael Collins, no relation to Jeremiah Collins, noted, "Area surrounding the white pine stand unusually quiet. No birds, no small game, though tracks indicate abundant wildlife in adjacent forest. Men reluctant to enter the stand itself. Dogs refuse to approach, becoming agitated and aggressive when urged forward. Search concluded at perimeter due to rapidly deteriorating weather conditions." The mystery deepened considerably on March 25, 1891, when Augustus Holmberg was found dead in his room at the Weyerhaeuser Hotel. The coroner's report listed the cause as self-termination by hanging, but noted several inconsistencies that troubled investigators. Most notably, the body was found suspended from a ceiling beam that structural assessments indicated should not have been able to support a man of Holmberg's size. The report also mentioned that Holmberg's hands were found tightly clenched, his fingernails embedded so deeply in his palms that they drew blood. Most disturbing was the discovery of a journal in Holmberg's possession, its pages filled with what Sheriff Patterson described as disturbing illustrations and unintelligible writing. This journal, photographed for the case file but subsequently lost when the Chippewa County Courthouse burned in 1903, reportedly contained drawings of distorted human figures with elongated limbs and features that one deputy described as more tree than man. According to witnesses who viewed the journal, many pages contained the same phrase written repeatedly in what appeared to be different handwriting styles. The forest claims its own. The final page, according to Sheriff Patterson's notes, contained a map of what appeared to be the Camp 27 area, with 13 X marks arranged in a perfect circle around the white pine stand on the far side of the river. Within a week of Holmberg's death, the remaining 5 survivors had dispersed. Olaf Lindstrom reportedly boarded a train to Minneapolis on March 28, 1891. Railroad records confirm his purchase of a ticket, but there is no evidence he ever arrived at his destination. A Minneapolis Police Department report dated April 4, 1891, documents a station master's concern about an abandoned piece of luggage belonging to a passenger named Lindstrom, who never claimed his bags. The luggage contained only clothing and a small cloth pouch filled with pine needles. Carl Schaefer was committed to the Northern Wisconsin Hospital after attempting to burn down a boarding house in Eau Claire on April 2, 1891. According to the commitment papers, Schaefer was found in the basement of the establishment, surrounded by piles of kindling and muttering, "Fire is the only thing they fear. Fire is how we keep them back." Hospital records indicate Schaefer was placed in the same ward as Jeremiah Collins, though staff noted the men never acknowledged each other's presence despite their shared experience. Schaefer's hospital file contains several concerning entries. On April 17, 1891, an attendant reported finding Schaefer standing motionless by his window for over 6 hours, staring at the tree line beyond the hospital grounds. On May 3rd, the patient was discovered attempting to scratch through the wooden floor of his room with his fingernails, which had been allowed to grow despite hospital policy. Most notably, on May 29th, a night attendant reported hearing Schaefer engaged in conversation with an unseen entity, repeatedly asking, "How many more do you need?" Peter Anderson and Mikhail Baranov supposedly departed Weyerhuser together on March 30, 1891, telling their landlady they intended to return to Camp 27 to collect their belongings and wages. A lumberman named Thomas Gunderson reported encountering the 2 men on the logging road that afternoon, approximately 5 miles from town. According to Gunderson's statement to the sheriff, both men appeared nervous and repeatedly looked over their shoulders. Gunderson recalled Baranov saying something peculiar as they parted ways. "If we are not back by nightfall, we were never meant to return." Neither man was ever seen in Weyerhuser again. Sheriff Patterson organized another search party on April 3rd, but found no trace of the men along the road or at the abandoned camp. The expedition reported one unsettling detail. Although Camp 27 had been vacant for over 2 weeks, the cook stove in the mess hall was warm to the touch, suggesting recent use. No other evidence of visitors was found. The investigation officially concluded on April 10, 1891, with Sheriff Patterson's final report stating, "In the absence of bodies or witnesses willing or able to provide a coherent account, this office can only conclude that the 13 missing men perished during a river crossing gone wrong." The contradictory statements of survivors are attributed to the trauma of witnessing their companions' deaths and the extreme conditions they endured in the forest before reaching town. However, a personal letter from Patterson to the Chippewa County District Attorney, discovered in 1952, suggests the sheriff had private reservations about his official conclusion. In the letter, Patterson wrote, "I have filed my report as expected, but between us, Hawkins, I am deeply troubled by this case. In 23 years of law enforcement, I have never encountered anything like it. The inconsistencies cannot be reconciled. The physical evidence contradicts all testimony, and I cannot shake the feeling that something truly horrific occurred in those woods, something beyond ordinary understanding." The Holmberg Timber Company closed Camp 27 permanently following the incident. Company ledgers show the valuable stand of white pine across the river was never harvested. A note in the company's financial records, dated April 15, 1891, indicates owner Heinrich Holmberg ordered the camp to be abandoned with all equipment left in place. An unusual decision given the considerable value of the tools and supplies. The company itself folded 2 years later, with financial records indicating a steep decline in productivity following the March 1891 incident. For decades, the tragedy remained little more than a footnote in local history, occasionally mentioned in newspaper retrospectives or county historical publications. This changed in 1937, when WPA worker Harold Meyer began collecting oral histories from elderly residents of Chippewa County. His interviews, preserved in the Library of Congress American Life Histories collection, revealed a complex local mythology had developed around Camp 27. According to these accounts, loggers in the region refused to work within 5 miles of the old campsite. Maps from the early 1900s show the area was deliberately avoided during subsequent logging operations, despite containing valuable timber. Local residents claim to hear phantom axe strikes in the forest at night, particularly during the late winter months. Most notably, several interviewees independently mentioned a folk belief that 13 trees in the forest contained the spirits of the missing loggers, trees that allegedly bled when cut. Meyer's interviews include testimony from Jacob Lindgren, who worked as a cook at a different logging camp in 1897. Lindgren recalled, "There was a French-Canadian logger, name of Bouchard, who claimed he got lost hunting and ended up near the old Holmberg camp. Said he found the bunkhouse still standing, looking like the men had just stepped out. Said he saw movement inside, but when he opened the door, found only 13 pairs of boots arranged in a circle in the center of the room. He left the area immediately and quit logging altogether the next day." Another account came from Margaret Wilson, who operated a boarding house in Weyerhaeuser from 1894 to 1920. Wilson told Meyer, "We had an unspoken rule never to rent rooms to men who came from the direction of the old Camp 27. There were stories of strangers who arrived in town speaking gibberish, their clothes smelling of pine sap despite the season. They never stayed more than one night, and all was left before dawn. Plants in rooms they occupied would be found dead the next morning." Perhaps most disturbing was the testimony of retired Sheriff's Deputy William Hayes, who had participated in the original 1891 search for the missing loggers. At the time of Meyer's interview in 1937, Hayes was 82 years old and suffering from what his family described as increasingly frequent confusion. Nevertheless, his recollection of the search remained vivid. Hayes told Meyer, "We found something out there that never made it into the official report. About a mile past the river in the direction of the White Pine Stand, we came across a clearing that wasn't natural. Perfectly circular, about 30 feet across, with the ground bare despite the surrounding snow cover. In the center was a pile of empty clothing, exactly 13 sets of work clothes laid out, as if the men wearing them had simply vanished from inside them. Sheriff Patterson ordered us to tell no one what we'd found. We left everything untouched and marked the location on no map." When asked why this discovery wasn't included in the official report, Hayes reportedly lowered his voice to a whisper despite being alone with Meyer. "Because 3 days later, we went back with more men to collect the evidence, and everything was gone. The clearing, the clothes, even the distinctive trees we had marked to find our way back, all gone. Instead, we found 13 saplings planted in a perfect circle, saplings that couldn't possibly have grown to that size in 3 days. In 1952, University of Wisconsin anthropologist Dr. Eleanor Katz conducted a study of folklore surrounding the logging industry. Her unpublished manuscript, Narratives of Fear in Wisconsin Logging Communities, contains an interview with Elizabeth Miller, daughter of Franz Miller, who had been at Camp 27, but not among the 19 selected to cross the river. According to the transcript, Elizabeth stated, "Father never spoke of what happened, but he would not allow lumber in our house. Our home was built of brick, our furniture of metal. When I asked why, he would say, 'Some trees remember what they've seen.'" Katz's manuscript includes another significant interview with Ida Schaefer, niece of Carl Schaefer, who visited her uncle regularly at the Northern Wisconsin Hospital until his death in 1893. Ida recalled, "Uncle Carl spent hours drawing the same image over and over, a circle of trees with faces in their trunks. He told me once, very clearly during a rare lucid moment, they made a bargain, you see. 13 men for 13 trees, but the forest is greedy. It will want more eventually." The most substantial investigation came in 1968, when historian Thomas Blackwood attempted to determine the precise location of Camp 27 and the site of the alleged tragedy. Blackwood, a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, specializing in logging industry history, had become fascinated with the Camp 27 incident after discovering Sheriff Patterson's private correspondence in the county archives. Blackwood assembled a research team consisting of himself, graduate student Rebecca Chen, photographer Daniel Morrison, and local guide Samuel Whitefeather, whose grandfather had worked as a logger in the region during the early 1900s. Their expedition was thoroughly documented through Blackwood's field notes, photographs, and audio recordings, all preserved in the University of Wisconsin archives. The team departed Weyerhaeuser on March 15, 1968, following historical maps and logging company records to locate the site of Camp 27. Blackwood's notes from March 16 state have located what appears to be Camp 27 foundations approximately 17 miles northwest of Weyerhaeuser, 3 structures arranged as described in company records: long rectangular foundation, likely bunkhouse, smaller square foundation, probable mess hall, and small rectangular foundation, foreman's office. Sam Whitefeather notes the unusual lack of forest reclamation, foundations clearly visible despite 77 years of abandonment. Photographs from this portion of the expedition show crumbling stone foundations partially covered with moss, but remarkably well preserved considering the decades of exposure to harsh Wisconsin winters. Of particular interest is a series of images showing what appears to be the remnants of the camp's well. Morrison's photographs capture a circular stone structure approximately 4 feet in diameter, its depth obscured by shadow despite the bright flash used. In a recorded conversation from that evening, Blackwood is heard discussing the well with Whitefeather. Blackwood: "Strange that the well hasn't filled in after all this time." Whitefeather: "Maybe it has. Maybe what you're seeing isn't the bottom." Blackwood: "What do you mean?" Whitefeather: "My grandfather told me the Holmberg Camp well had no bottom. That's why the loggers avoided it. One man lost a watch down it, said they lowered a lantern on 200 feet of rope and never saw it hit water." Blackwood, laughing: "Well, every camp has its stories, Whitefeather. This isn't a story. My grandfather wouldn't drink from that well. None of the Indian loggers would. They said it tasted like something was already drinking from the other side." The expedition continued toward the Black River crossing point the following day. Blackwood's notes from March 17, 1968, exactly 77 years after the disappearance, contain a disturbing entry. "Have reached the river. Peculiar atmosphere here, dead quiet. No birds, no insects. Team on edge. Compasses spinning. Will camp overnight and cross tomorrow." An audio recording from that evening captures an unsettling ambient silence, punctuated only by the crackling of the team's campfire. Approximately 27 minutes into the recording, a series of rhythmic sounds are audible in the distance, regular impacts that several audio analysts have identified as consistent with the sound of axe strikes on wood. The recording captures the following conversation. Chen: "Is someone out there?" Morrison: "Sounds like chopping." Blackwood: "At this hour? In this location?" Whitefeather: "We should leave. Now." Blackwood: "Sam, there's probably a logical explanation." Whitefeather: "Yes, there is, and that's why we should leave." The recording continues for another 3 minutes, during which the chopping sounds gradually increase in volume and tempo. The final 30 seconds capture Whitefeather speaking in what linguists have identified as Ojibwe, apparently addressing someone or something not visible to the camera. The recording ends abruptly mid-sentence. This is the final documented evidence from the Blackwood expedition. According to police reports, Blackwood and his team were reported missing 3 days later when they failed to return to Weyerhaeuser. A subsequent search and rescue operation discovered their abandoned camp on the near side of the Black River. All equipment was found in place, including valuable cameras and recording devices. There was no sign of struggle or distress. The search operation, led by Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Officer Robert Lakeland, covered a 5-mile radius around the campsite. Lakeland's report notes, "No tracks leading away from camp despite soft ground that should have preserved footprints. River conditions mild. Crossing would have been easily possible. No evidence of accident or violence. 4 adult individuals appear to have vanished without trace." Like the loggers 77 years earlier, the 4 researchers had seemingly disappeared without explanation. The search was abandoned after 2 weeks, with authorities concluding the team had likely attempted to cross the river and drowned. Their bodies were never recovered. A curious footnote to the Blackwood disappearance emerged 5 months later. On August 23, 1968, a hiker named Martin Collins discovered a camera approximately 10 miles downstream from the presumed river crossing point. The film was developed by police and found to contain 23 exposures taken by the Blackwood expedition. 22 of these matched photographs already in evidence from the team's documentation of Camp 27. The final photograph, however, showed what appeared to be the White Pine Stand on the far side of the river, the presumed destination of both the original logging expedition and Blackwood's research team. The image is poorly focused, but clearly shows a circular arrangement of extremely large white pine trees. In the center of the circle appears to be a dark object that analysts have variously identified as a stump, a hole in the ground, or a standing figure. Most disturbing is a handwritten note found with the camera, written on a page apparently torn from Blackwood's field journal. The note, confirmed to be in Blackwood's handwriting, contains only 5 words. They are not trees. Run. The land where Camp 27 once stood was purchased by the U.S. Forest Service in 1969 and incorporated into the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest. Interestingly, Forest Service maps mark the area with the notation Ecological Research Zone, no timber harvesting permitted. When contacted for this documentary, Forest Service officials would only state that the designation was made due to unique biological characteristics of the old-growth forest in that sector. Unofficial conversations with Forest Service personnel reveal a more concerning policy. A ranger who requested anonymity stated, "We're under strict instructions to avoid that section of the forest, especially after dark. Maintenance is minimal, trails are deliberately left unmarked, and any reports of strange occurrences in the area are routed directly to the regional supervisor rather than being logged in the normal system." In 1974, University of Wisconsin botanist Dr. James Winters attempted to conduct a survey of the restricted zone after noticing unusual patterns in aerial photographs. According to university records, Winters applied for a special research permit but was denied access without explanation. Winters proceeded without authorization, accompanied by 2 graduate students. The group was reported missing after failing to check in for 3 consecutive days. A search operation located their vehicle parked at an unmarked forest access road. Inside the car was Winters' voice recorder, containing a single brief recording. In it, Winters is heard stating, "March 19th, 6:42 p.m. We've found the circle. The trees are exactly as described in the Blackwood materials. Massive white pines, at least 300 years old, arranged in a perfect circle, approximately 30 meters in diameter. Jonas is taking samples. Ellen is photographing. Something odd about the bark texture. Appears to have irregular patterns that almost resemble." The recording ends abruptly with what sound analysts have described as a low rumbling noise, followed by multiple impacts. All 3 researchers were eventually found 5 days later, wandering separately along different forest roads miles from their intended research site. Medical reports indicate all three suffered from severe dehydration, exposure, and what clinicians described as acute stress reaction. None had any memory of what occurred after entering the forest, and all three resigned their positions at the university within 6 months of the incident. In a curious epilogue to this story, the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources conducted an aerial survey of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest in 1963, mapping the distribution of various tree species. The survey photographs, archived at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, show an unusual pattern in the region of the former Camp 27, a perfect circle of white pine trees approximately 1 mile in diameter. Forestry experts consulted for this documentary could offer no natural explanation for this formation. What truly happened to those 13 loggers in March 1891? The official explanation, a river crossing gone wrong, seems increasingly implausible when examined against the evidence. No bodies were ever recovered despite extensive searching. The survivors' accounts contradicted each other and, in some cases, defied rational explanation. The location became the center of persistent local legends, and 77 years later, another group of people vanished in exactly the same place. Perhaps most telling is what happened to the 6th survivor, Mikhail Baranov. After disappearing from Weyerhaeuser in 1891, Baranov resurfaced in Minneapolis in 1893, according to city directory records. He lived there in obscurity for nearly 20 years, working various jobs as a laborer and handyman. According to a short article in the Minneapolis Tribune dated December 12, 1912, Baranov spent his final years in a Minneapolis boarding house, speaking to no one and working as a maintenance man at a local furniture factory. The article, titled "Local Man's Strange Passing," reports that after Baranov's death, his landlady discovered the walls of his room were covered with small carved wooden figures, 19 in total. 13 of these figures had no faces. 6 had faces rendered in meticulous detail. The article notes that Baranov had carved his own likeness with its eyes closed, and Augustus Holmberg's with a rope around its neck. Most disturbing was the landlady's description of the room itself. The walls were covered with a substance that appeared to be tree sap, arranged in patterns resembling text in no language I recognize. The boards of the floor had been pried up in the center of the room, revealing a cavity filled with pine needles. Beneath the needles was a bound journal which, upon inspection, appeared to be written in Mr. Baranov's hand, but in his native Russian language. This journal was eventually translated by Professor Alexei Komarov of the University of Minnesota in 1957, after being discovered in the archives of the Minneapolis Historical Society. According to Komarov's translation, the journal begins coherently, with Baranov recounting the events at Camp 27. His version differs significantly from the testimony he gave to Sheriff Patterson. Baranov wrote, "Holmberg knew what waited across the river. He had made a bargain the previous autumn when he first surveyed the timber stand. 13 trees for 13 men, that was the exchange. But he did not tell us. He selected those of us who would survive and those who would be taken." The journal continues with an increasingly fractured narrative, describing how the logging crew did indeed cross the river successfully, reaching the white pine stand by mid-morning. Baranov wrote, "The trees stood in a circle, impossibly tall and straight. The men began to prepare their tools, but Holmberg ordered us to wait. 'Not yet,' he said. 'It has to be at noon, when the sun is directly overhead.'" What followed, according to Baranov's account, defies rational explanation. As the sun reached its zenith, the forest reportedly fell completely silent. Baranov described a sensation of pressure, like being deep underwater, followed by a sound like wood creaking, but formed into words somehow. The 13 men designated for the trade allegedly began walking into the circle one by one, moving as if in a trance. The final coherent entry in Baranov's journal states, "I hear them at night, not just the 13 who were taken, but others, many others. They whisper from inside the walls, from inside the wood itself. They tell me the forest has always been hungry. They tell me 13 was not enough. They tell me the trees are spreading, always spreading, and one day there will be nowhere left to run. The remainder of the journal deteriorates into what Komarov described as increasingly abstract and disturbing imagery, with entire pages filled with repetitive drawings of trees with human features and human figures with branch-like limbs. The final page contains a single sentence, written in English rather than Russian. They are not trees. They have never been trees. Those who have ventured near the old Camp 27 site in recent years report an unnatural silence in the forest. Park rangers interviewed off the record mention the area is avoided by wildlife. One ranger, speaking on condition of anonymity, stated, "We don't go there at night, not since '86, when 2 of our guys went missing during a routine patrol. They were experienced outdoorsmen. Their truck was found parked on the old logging road. Inside was a tape recorder still running. Nothing on the tape but static and what sounds like axe strikes in the distance." In 1991, exactly 100 years after the original incident, the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire organized a centennial expedition to document the site. Despite extensive planning and safety precautions, the university canceled the project 1 week before its scheduled departure. The official explanation cited budget constraints, but internal memos obtained through Freedom of Information requests reveal administrators received an anonymous package containing a single pine needle and a note reading simply, "The forest remembers." Local resident Thomas Gunderson, grandson of the lumberman who reported the last sighting of Anderson and Baranov in 1891, continues to maintain a small museum of logging history in Weyerhäuser. Among the exhibits is a collection of items allegedly connected to the Camp 27 incident, including an axe reportedly found at the site in 1927, its metal head partially embedded in a section of petrified wood. When asked about the persistent legends surrounding Camp 27, Gunderson offers a perspective shared by many local residents. Something happened out there that doesn't fit neatly into history books. The official story, men drowning crossing a river, doesn't explain the fear that still keeps people away from that section of forest. It doesn't explain why trees won't grow on the old camp foundations, or why animals avoid the area, or why every few decades people still go missing in those woods. Gunderson's museum contains one particularly disturbing artifact, a jar filled with what appears to be pine sap collected from the site in 1967. "My father found this," Gunderson explains. He said the sap was flowing upward on one of the trees near the old camp, defying gravity. Scientists from the university said it was impossible, but here's the proof. And if you look closely, sometimes you can see it move on its own, even now. In 1992, paranormal researcher Dr. Marion Blackwell published Whispering Pines, Unexplained Disappearances in American Forests, which dedicated an entire chapter to the Camp 27 incident. Blackwell's research uncovered a disturbing pattern. Every 13 years since 1891, at least one person has disappeared in the vicinity of the former logging camp. The disappearances typically occur in March, often on or near the anniversary of the original incident. Blackwell documented these disappearances meticulously. 1904, game warden Frederick Johnson, last seen checking traps near the Black River. 1917, local hunter William Stromberg, who reportedly told friends he was going to finally get a look at those special trees. 1930, university botanist Dr. Henry Wilson and field assistant Thomas Green. 1943, 3 members of a timber survey crew working for the War Department. 1956, photographer Elaine Montgomery researching images for a book on Wisconsin folklore. 1969, the 4 members of Thomas Blackwood's research expedition. 1982, hiker James Peterson, whose journal was found containing entries about trees that don't move like trees should. 1995, environmental activist Sarah Coleman, investigating rumors of illegal logging in the restricted zone. 2008, Amateur historian Michael Davis, attempting to map the precise location of Camp 27. The pattern is undeniable, Blackwell wrote, even if the explanation remains elusive. Something in those woods takes people, and has been doing so methodically for over a century. Perhaps the most scientific attempt to understand the Camp 27 phenomena came in 1997, when dendrochronologist Dr. Rebecca Chen, ironically, the same Rebecca Chen who had disappeared with Blackwood's expedition in 1968 before being found wandering days later, conducted a study of tree growth patterns in the Chequamegon-Nicolo National Forest. Despite her personal experience, or perhaps because of it, Chen had devoted her career to studying anomalous tree formations. With special permission from the Forest Service and accompanied by armed rangers, Chen collected core samples from trees at increasing distances from the restricted zone. Her published findings in the Journal of Arboreal Studies noted, tree rings show a consistent pattern of accelerated growth in years following the documented disappearances, particularly in white pines. This suggests a periodic release of nutrients into the soil, a phenomenon typically observed after forest fires or mass die-offs, neither of which have occurred in this region. In her private notes, obtained after her death in 2016, Chen wrote more candidly, "The trees are feeding. The pattern is unmistakable. Every 13 years they take what they need, and they grow. The Forest Service knows. That's why the area is restricted. They've made the same bargain Holmberg made, sacrifice a few to protect the many. But the circle is widening. I've documented expansion of nearly 2 miles since the first aerial surveys. At the current rate, it will reach Weyerhaeuser within 50 years." The most recent chapter in the Camp 27 story came in 2021, when a previously unknown diary was discovered during the renovation of a historic home in Eau Claire. The diary belonged to Dr. Thomas Anderson, the physician who examined the 6 survivors in 1891. Hidden in a compartment behind a brick in the chimney, the diary had remained concealed for more than a century. The diary contains Anderson's private thoughts about the Camp 27 incident, revealing his deep unease with the official explanation. He wrote on March 24, 1891, "I cannot reconcile what I observed with what the men claimed. Their physical condition contradicted every aspect of their testimony, yet I cannot offer a rational alternative. What I can say with certainty is that all 6 men carried the same peculiar odor, not unwashed bodies or river water, but something sickly sweet like tree sap, mixed with decay." Most significantly, Anderson documented his examination of an unusual substance found on Holmberg's clothing. The foreman's jacket contained a sticky residue unlike anything I have encountered. Under magnification, it appears to contain both sap-like components and what I can only describe as microscopic fibers that move independently when exposed to heat. I have preserved a sample for further study, though I confess the material unsettles me profoundly. Anderson's final entry regarding Camp 27, dated April 17, 1891, reads, "I visited the site myself today, driven by a compulsion I cannot explain. I approached from the north, avoiding the river crossing entirely. The camp stands abandoned, yet does not feel empty. I observed the circle of white pines in the distance, but could not bring myself to approach closer. As I turned to leave, I noticed fresh tracks leading from the camp to the river, tracks that appeared human at first glance, but upon closer examination seemed subtly wrong in ways I struggle to articulate. I have resolved never to return and to burn this sample I collected. Some knowledge is too dangerous to preserve." Intriguingly, the diary indicates Anderson did not burn the sample as intended. He wrote, "I found I could not destroy it. When I held it to the flame, I heard, or thought I heard, a sound like distant screaming. The sample now resides in a sealed glass vial in my medical cabinet. May God forgive me, but I cannot relinquish this evidence, horrifying as its implications may be." Researchers who examined the Anderson home found no trace of the sample he described. However, they did discover a small hidden compartment in his medical cabinet, containing only a circle of dried pine needles surrounding a depression in the wood, where something had once rested. The town of Weyerhaeuser has an uneasy relationship with its dark history. While some residents, like Thomas Gunderson, preserve the legends, others prefer to distance themselves from the Camp 27 story. The local Chamber of Commerce makes no mention of the incident in its promotional materials, focusing instead on the town's logging heritage and outdoor recreation opportunities. Yet the story persists in local consciousness. Elementary school teacher Margaret Wilson, who has lived in Weyerhaeuser all her life, explains, "Every child who grows up here learns about Camp 27 eventually. It's our local boogeyman tale. Don't go into the North Woods or the trees will get you." Parents discourage the stories, but they spread anyway. And every few years, when someone else goes missing in that part of the forest, the whispers start again. Folklorist Dr. James Patterson, no relation to Sheriff Patterson, of the University of Minnesota, has studied the Camp 27 narrative as an example of occupational folklore. Logging was, and remains, dangerous work, Patterson explains. The Camp 27 story encapsulates the very real perils of the profession: isolation, harsh conditions, the constant threat of death. But it also speaks to a deeper, more primal fear: the forest as an entity with its own awareness and agenda. Many cultures have traditions portraying the natural world as something that can strike back against human encroachment. The Camp 27 legend is a particularly American manifestation of that archetype. Yet the persistence and consistency of the Camp 27 accounts, spanning more than a century, suggests something beyond mere folklore. The physical evidence, from the abandoned camp to the circular tree formation to the documented disappearances, resists simple classification as urban legend. In 2017, an anonymous Forest Service employee leaked a classified report analyzing soil samples from the restricted zone. The report, dated 2005, notes abnormally high concentrations of organic compounds typically associated with decomposition, as well as elevated levels of iron consistent with blood content. Most notably, the report identifies anomalous cellular structures not consistent with known plant or animal taxonomy, described as exhibiting characteristics of both plant xylem and animal nervous tissue. The report concludes with a recommendation that the restricted zone be expanded by an additional 3-mile buffer and that all research requests for the area be denied indefinitely. A handwritten note in the margin reads simply, "Containment is priority. Prevention impossible at this stage." For those who venture into the forests of northern Wisconsin today, the area around the former Camp 27 presents a strange paradox. Official maps show a nondescript section of the Chequamegon-Nicolet National Forest, with no trails, no markers, and no indication of historical significance. Forest Service signs warn of environmentally sensitive habitat and prohibit entry without explicit permission. Yet locals know to avoid the area, particularly as March approaches. Hunters report their dogs refusing to track game into the sector. Hikers describe an unnatural silence that descends suddenly, replacing the normal sounds of forest life. Aircraft pilots mention unusual air currents and unexplained instrument fluctuations when passing overhead. What truly happened to those 13 loggers in the winter of 1891? The physical evidence suggests they never drowned crossing a river. The testimonies of survivors hint at something far more disturbing than a simple accident. The pattern of disappearances in the decades since points to an ongoing phenomenon rather than a singular historical event. The forest holds many secrets. Some, perhaps, are better left undisturbed. As we conclude this documentary, we leave you with the final lines from Carl Schaefer's journal, discovered after his death at the Northern Wisconsin Hospital in 1893. The passage, written in increasingly erratic handwriting, reads, "The trees watch us. They have always watched us. We cut them down by the thousands, and they remember every stroke. In the oldest parts of the forest, where no man has ever cut, they wait, and sometimes, when the conditions are right, they reach back. For those living near the forests of northern Wisconsin, perhaps a moment of reflection is warranted. The next time you hear the wind moving through the pines, consider carefully, is it merely the wind, or is it something else, something older, something patient, something that remembers? And perhaps most unsettling of all, the question no investigator has ever satisfactorily answered. If 13 men were indeed taken by something in the forest that day in 1891, why were 6 allowed to return? What purpose did their traumatized testimonies serve? Was their survival merely chance, or part of some larger design, a message or a warning carried back from the wilderness? In March 2021, exactly 130 years after the Camp 27 incident, researcher Michael Thompson set out to definitively map the location using modern GPS technology. His expedition was meticulously planned, with hourly check-ins scheduled with colleagues at the University of Wisconsin. Thompson carried state-of-the-art recording equipment, satellite communications gear, and emergency locator beacons. Thompson's final communication came at 11:17 a.m. on March 17, 2021. The GPS coordinates placed him approximately half a mile from the presumed location of Camp 27. His message was brief. Found old logging road, following to camp site. Strange fog rolling in despite clear weather forecast. Will update in 30 minutes. No further communications were received. Search and rescue operations began that evening, when Thompson missed his scheduled check-in. His vehicle was located at the forest access point, containing his camping gear and supplies, suggesting he had planned only a day trip rather than an overnight stay. After 3 days of intensive searching, Thompson's equipment was found in a small clearing: his backpack, camera, satellite phone, and GPS unit, all arranged in a neat circle. The camera contained dozens of photographs of ordinary forest scenes, ending with a series of images showing a distant clearing where thin, vertical shapes, presumably trees, appeared to be arranged in a circle. The final image on Thompson's camera has become something of an internet phenomenon since it was leaked online by a member of the search team. Blurry and underexposed, it appears to show a stand of white pine trees with unusual patterns in their bark, patterns that, under enhancement, bear an unsettling resemblance to human faces. Michael Thompson himself was never found. For generations, the forests of northern Wisconsin have drawn people seeking resources, recreation, solitude, or answers. Most return unchanged. Some never return at all. And a rare few come back fundamentally altered, carrying stories that challenge our understanding of the natural world and our place within it. The Camp 27 incident may never be fully explained. The passage of time, the loss of evidence, and the deaths of all direct witnesses have ensured that certain aspects of the mystery will remain forever beyond reach. Yet the pattern continues, the restricted zone remains, and every 13 years the forest claims its due. As we end this narration, we leave you with the words carved into a bench near the Weyerhuser Public Library, anonymously installed in the night of March 17, 1943. The forest remembers, the trees are patient, and there will always be those who venture too far. The next time you walk among ancient trees, listen carefully to the sounds around you. That isn't just the wind you hear in the branches. It might be something else entirely, something whispering your name, inviting you deeper into the woods, promising to share secrets known only to the forest and the missing.